and unfortunately we are inside. Uh, but it's a very interesting topic and a very exciting one actually. India's urbanization is a given. I think it's all fairly well understood. The problem essentially has to do with the character that it will take going forward. And one of the most important elements of that, again, as we all know, has to do with low income housing. There is the PMAY-U, it is India's and I mean probably the world's most expansive program and the most ambitious one. An unprecedented 12 million, sorry, 11.9 million houses, which would be roughly about 10% of census 2011 urban housing stock, uh, have been sanctioned in the first phase. Second phase, with some revisions to the program design, was announced with an intent of aiding the construction of another 10 million houses. Um, Now, as we all realize, the PMAY-U is a really important element in the larger urban development space. Issues such as urban planning, um, urban infrastructure, obviously urban transport, land prices, uh, uh, the terms at which these entities are being made available, etc., all have a very deep interplay with the design of the program. And these throw up many fascinating and interesting issues. One of them is obviously, is this program successful? And of course, the glass is always half full, and so it is in this case as well. It's really, really critical, I feel, to understand what elements are really working well and which ones could do with some improvements. Or should you really change the character of this, of some of the elements of this program, or should we retain it? I mean, so these are really interesting questions that come up. And today we will be discussing some of these questions, uh, focusing on the PMAY and that of India's low-income housing ecosystem. A recent working paper, which is the outcome of independent research undertaken by our research scholars on the first phase of PMAY-U, highlights three challenging areas. Scaling up of the development of flats for EWS households, EWS households limited access to home loans from institutional sources, and sorry, the third one on the EWS households limited access to home loans, and of course addressing the slum housing problem. How can these challenges be navigated? Answers to these questions hold the key for the recently announced PMAY-U 2.0 to be more effective than the first phase. In today's agenda, we have a brief presentation from research fellow Debarpita Roy. This will be followed by a panel discussion for which we have a diverse and a very apt panel of experts. Introducing them, Shri Rajiv Ranjan Mishra has been a retired additional secretary, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and former Director General, National Mission for Clean Ganga. As Additional Secretary, Joint Secretary in Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, he piloted several policies and path-breaking legislations like the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act 2016. He was also instrumental in development of affordable housing policy, Model Tenancy Act, inclusion of affordable housing in the list of infrastructure, and the launch of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, or a PMAY-U, in 2015. Raghav Garg is a promoter of Landcraft developers and member at the Garg Group with over 15 years of experience in real estate. He brings in the private sector experience here. Raghav is also working on a prop tech venture and actively supports early stage companies. He has been a champion of reforms in the affordable housing policy of UP and has been appointed as a member at the Haryana Housing Board. He holds a master's in management from London Business School. Shahana Chattaraj is a director of research at the World Resources Institute Center for Equitable Development. Dr. Chattaraj's research interests lie at the intersection of cities and development with a focus on comparative urban research and the informal economy. Shahana has taught and held fellowships at Oxford, the University of Pennsylvania, and the Center for Policy Research. She holds a PhD in public affairs from Princeton and a master's degree in international development from MIT and an undergraduate degree in architecture. So over to you, Debarpita. It's been welcome to all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravi, our President, Center for Social and Economic Progress. Can we start the presentation? So as it starts, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban was made up of 5 different verticals. The first 4 that you see were the original verticals, and the last one was actually took shape in the aftermath of the huge reverse migration from our cities as the affordable rental housing complex. Now, in my study, I cover the first 4 because affordable rental housing as such is a completely different market with very different dynamics of demand and supply than the ownership market, which was the prime motive of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban and continues to remain so even in its second phase. The 4 main verticals were the beneficiary-led construction vertical, and why those small rather photos I have put up there is rather for you guys, for anybody in this audience who does not really understand kind of these verticals resonates with them like in their dreams as it does for me. It just kind of gives you a good mental anchor to what am I talking about when I talk about BLC or AHP or ISSR. Okay, so beneficiary-led construction was a vertical where you have economically weaker section household. By economically weaker section, I mean a household which has a household income of rupees 3 lakh or less per annum, 25,000 about a month. And you own a plot of land, okay? That has to be, you have to own a plot of land. And but you are unable to construct a pakka house, that's assumption, on your own. You do not own a pakka house anywhere in India, either in rural India or in urban India. You might have a kacha house or a semi-pakka house on that plot of land. The central government will give you about 1.5 lakh rupees for that as a subsidy for constructing a pakka house, and the state government might match it. Anywhere the state government subsidy varied between 1 lakh to about 2.5 lakhs max. In some states, I think it was even 50,000. Some states also went ahead and gave rather pattas. So you might own a piece of land, but you do not have the requisite land documentation, which was absolutely required for you to avail the subsidy. Unless you are a bona fide owner of that piece of land, you have the record of rights to that land, land records or land certificate or patta that's usually referred to, you cannot avail the subsidy. So some states also did that. I'm trying to understand in Andhra Pradesh, there was a huge, BLC had a huge take up, whether the Andhra Pradesh government claimed that we are also given land. Now, to what extent really that has played out and to what percentage of BLC, that's something that, we are currently looking at, not a part of the paper that we could cover. So that is BLC. Okay, you own a land, you own a piece of land and you are given a subsidy to help you build a house there. The affordable housing in partnership was for those EWS households, you do not own a piece of land, you do not own land, right? Then you have to have a house. So what is the way to go about that? That, okay, the government is giving a subsidy to a developer. The developer could be a state housing board, a public housing agency, or a private developer like Raghav here, right, who works along with the state housing board, the state government in private partnership model, and then that implementing agency gets the subsidy of again 1.5 lakhs from central government and some money from the state government, and you are then supposed to give the house to the beneficiary at a mandated price by the state government, depending on the affordability of the state mandated, the state's assessment of the affordability of the EWS household. The average beneficiary share in EWS was around rupees 3.2 lakhs. Okay, and this is more or less in sync. If I look at the NSS data for housing rounds and the AIDIS data of how much do EWS households who do not have access to home loans spend on housing, can spend of housing, it's broadly in the range of 3 to about 4 lakhs, depending on whether it's NSS housing survey or the AIDIS survey. So that is AHP. Then, so it's basically construction of EWS flats. Now, the EWS flats could also be a standalone EWS flat project, or it could be a part of a larger project in which a certain number of houses has to be EWS. Then the third vertical was in situ slum redevelopment. Slum redevelopment works on the idea again of land monetization. It works on the idea of land monetization. You have a slum, and that you evict the slum dwellers from there, right? Move the slum dwellers to some transit housing somewhere else. What is actually happening in Dharavi right now? Okay, supposed to happen, or the government has been trying to make it happen for the last 3 decades. But anyway, so, and on part of that cleared slum land, you build flats for the slum households, and on the rest, and usually you give those houses for free, which usually happens that way in Bombay. From the rest of the slum land, you build free for sale offices, apartments, etc. But free for sale component in the market. That's the principle of institute. And now under PMAY-U, on top of land monetization, which is usually what makes the housing, the flats for the EWS households work, there was an additional subsidy of 1 lakh rupees given by the central government. But despite that, really, it did not take off. And the fourth vertical pertains to home loans. You are a borrower, and this is the only vertical which also catered to the higher income groups of low income group households. That is, households having an annual income of rupees 3 lakhs to 6 lakhs, and even middle income group households which had annual income between 6 lakhs to 18 lakhs. Okay. Now that has been revised. This 18 lakhs has been revised to 9 lakhs in the second phase of PMAY-U. And in this, a subsidy again, this was the only sub-scheme rather which was only had a subsidy component and which was implemented as a central sector scheme and only had a subsidy component from the central government. The state government did not have any subsidy for this. But when we dug into the implementation of all these sub-schemes, we see that the important role that the state government had to play, not only for the first 3, where it was anyway given money, but even for CLSS, which was a huge success in Gujarat, where CLSS rather was the most popular sub-scheme, the Gujarat government set up a high-level CLSS monitoring committee. And possibly that's the reason why that, Gujarat, we find that about roughly 40% of all home loan borrowers from Gujarat had access to CLSS, which did not happen. Even Maharashtra, by the way, has the maximum home loan borrowers in our country. Okay. But even in Maharashtra, just about the CLSS penetration, if you look at, was just around 9% in their total, home loan borrower pool. But for Gujarat, it was close to, like 40%, which is a huge, and it is nothing but the outcome of the, proactiveness of the Gujarat state government in setting up this committee and following it up the CLSS implementation very, very clearly. Now, what is the outcome of this in terms of, how our various sub-schemes did? BLC by far has been driving PMAY-U numbers. Okay, 62% of PMAY-U members have been on account of beneficially led, that you already own a plot of land. The government is just giving you some money to help you kind of construct a house there. And what is interesting, if you see BLC and CLSS together, which are the demand side schemes, where you as a household have complete control over the kind of house you are building, where you are building it, that makes up 83% of your total sanctions. The rest is made of mostly by AHP and a little bit by ISSR. Now, of course, it's very obvious. Also, one more obvious reason is that in BLC and CLSS, there's no, construction of house. The government is not involved in the construction of a house. It's not your responsibility. It is the household which is either purchasing a house in case of CLSS or building a house in case of CLSS and BLC. You're just giving the money. In case of AHP and ISSR, you have to construct and develop the house. I mean, it's not just constructing the flat. It is doing the entire process of development, right? Which the government, the state housing agency has to do. And private developers, though AHP and ISSR both were conceived, and still the government is very, very bullish in private developer participation. But Raghav will in a very short while shed that how difficult it is, having himself done that. Okay. Now, where did this BLC houses really happen? Again, no surprises here. BLC houses happened where people own land, where EWS households own land, which is in the small cities. The small cities is a non-class 1 city, or cities with less than 1 lakh population. Now, a very important ramification of this, analysis is that million plus cities remain very poorly served by PMAY-U. And even though in million plus cities, you see that CLSS was the most popular sub-scheme, the picture becomes even darker if I look at this, that in million plus cities among CLSS beneficiaries, only 20% were EWS households. It is very, very encouraging to note that the red band, which is LIG households, make up, about 58%, which shows that yes, the government was serious, and the government is serious that we want to cater to low income households, because otherwise the bulk would have been middle income group households, which it was not. Now the source of my data is again government data. The entire study mostly has been based on the data that we have scraped from the PMAY dashboard. My colleague sitting back there, Rashmi, please stand up. I mean, she has been at it, breaking her head over 1.5 years on this. And but having said this definitely, makes the picture very, very grim in terms of that what is happening to EWS households living in the million plus cities, where even a program like PMAY-U is not able to really reach them, right? So that's the first point, rather, of the first thing that needs attention in the second phase of PMAY, that EWS households need to be better served under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana 2.0. And for that, the access to institutional home loans needs attention firstly. Secondly, is that even the slum coverage has been poor. Again, this data we could get this data from the Lok Sabha Standing Committee report, which was published in 2023, and which gave at the state level under the the three sub schemes of AHP, BLC, and ISSR, how many slum households were covered. And collating, then we find this 19% across these three sub schemes, where 19% of the beneficiaries were slum households. And that translates to, we don't have the latest census as yet, in terms of census 2011, just about 12% of the slum households, right? And if you look at Pradhan Mantri update, the Awas Yojana updates in the public domain, which we had accessed, there was really no data on the monitoring of slums, of the number of slum households which are being covered by state, by city, which is something that the second phase should address, right? It should include, but the second phase guidelines as yet, though it does say that, BLC, under BLC, slum upgradation should be, increasingly looked at, etc., etc., but it does not make the mention that the the ULBs and the state nodal agencies should actively make it mandatory that you have to report back to us on how many slum households are you covering at regular intervals along with you. Now, my final slide. Now, for million plus cities to be catered well, something like BLC really cannot take off. Okay. People, first of all, do not own land there. And even the households which are living in slums there, to give them to really, do in situ slum upgradation, right? If it's a state government land, or if it's a municipal body land, which usually, the slums are, uh, built on, but it is a huge, you cannot just ask the state government or the municipal body to just, give away the land just like that to the slum households, that, just issue them pattas and please let them be the owners. Because first of all, the slum households can never give you pay you the market price, right? And they will not. There's a huge political economy around it. And secondly, you just cannot say that, okay, let's just give them the land for free. It just doesn't work, because our state governments, our municipal bodies are anyway cash strapped. And housing is not the only thing that, they are going after. Okay, they have a lot of functions to perform. That's my personal opinion. So in that case, there is no other way But to make EWS flats work, flat apartment complexes work in this, big million plus cities. But why is it so difficult? The reason which was given in the official CSMC documents, which is the Central Sanctioning and Monitoring Committee minutes of meeting, is that there was land, disputes and litigation. That was a huge challenge, and lack of beneficiary interest. But those are, standard things which affect all kinds of real estate projects, not just, EWS projects, right? And if we look at the statistics for the total number of sanctioned AHP projects and the cancelled, about 50% of the sanctioned AHP projects have been cancelled in terms of the number of flats, citing these two reasons. But when I talk to my colleagues and my friends in the real estate sector, right, everybody is like, तुम पागल हो, कोई नहीं बनाएगा, ठीक है? It doesn't make sense. कोई नहीं बना सकता. मैंने कहा क्यों नहीं बना सकता, right? And me and Shishir kept on having these discussions that Shishir, it's just not possible. I said, why not just let's put the numbers on the paper and see that okay, how do the numbers stack up? So just this very simple exercise. The total cost of building an apartment, including or excluding land cost, has to be met through either subsidy or beneficiary share, which is the price. And your subsidy thus has to be the cost minus the beneficiary share. Okay. Now, assuming a beneficiary share of the average HP beneficiary share is rupees 3.2 lakhs. And then I worked out the cost of providing, making developing a about 400 square foot EWS flat. The subsidy requirement is under the different scenarios of either whether you're building a G+3 structure, which does not require a lift, or a multi-story structure, which requires a lift and other services. In case where the land cost is a very minimal, rupees 500. By the way, this is even less than, the circle rate for the category H land in the Delhi zone. Or where you completely forgo, okay, yeah, you're making EWS flats, the state government says, I write off the land cost, which is the first two bars, right? When let's assume the completely hypothetical situation, land is freely available. Then also I see that the subsidy which is being given, the average subsidy which is being given under HP, and the subsidy required, there's this huge shortfall of around, 6 lakhs. The idea behind, now everybody is aware that yes, there is a subsidy gap. The idea behind is that you will cross subsidize. That you will, build office complexes, or you will build, MIG or HIG housing, and there those you will sell at a profit that will kind of cross subsidize the loss that you're making here. But this huge quantum of cross subsidization that is required, which is between rupees 6 lakhs and 12 lakhs, it's actually not 12 lakhs, because 500 rupees per square foot on FAR is a very, very, kind of minimalistic assumption. Is this really practical to be met? The answer is, it's of course it's not. Okay. But to deliberate, that's what, we seek to want to deliberate more. And of course, one thing which is very apparent from here is just, we keep on hearing land is the problem, land is the problem. Land, if you consider building EWS flats, only just taking care of land is not going to solve your problem. There are myriad other issues that you have to take into account. You have to make this cross subsidy, element work. Or you have to put in that kind of money, which usually the OECD countries do when they build public housing. So as a result of which, of course, there has been complete lack of private sector, private developer participation in AHP, save Maharashtra, where they completely redefined the EWS income definition, not to 3 lakhs, but raised it to 6 lakhs, and then this became viable. I will stop here, sir, and I will turn to you at this point. You have been one of the sutradhars of the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana phase 1's guidelines and conceptualizing and formulating that. In light of, what we see, and of course, your own understanding about the program, what you envisioned and what you see now, your reflections to start with.
Good. I think I'm really happy to be here, though I was little skeptical whether I should come here because I am not dealing with this sector, this thing. But good to see a lot of old friends. See what you have projected. I think the problems which you have found are real. It's not that anyone will not agree with your observations, but I would like to put it in a very different perspective. We have spent 5 years. We have sanctioned more than 118 lakhs houses. We have completed more than 80 lakhs houses, almost 90 lakhs houses. AHP also is something like 15, 16 lakhs houses. Even if something has been cancelled, the numbers are quite huge. And which you also agreed. This is one of the most ambitious program which has also been implemented to a great extent correctly. I mean, because the numbers speak. I mean, you will find in some verticals, some sector not getting enough and all that. One thing we should be very clear, and when we were conceptualizing this program, that we need to bring different options. Because if you look at pre-PMAY, I mean, lot of emphasis was there on the slum housing, whether it is JNURM housing or whatever it is. If you see the number, 10, 15 years, we used to construct 10 lakhs houses in the whole country. So where is 10 lakhs? Where is 1 crore we are talking? So I think you have to agree that this approach has certainly scaled it up at a much higher level. And we are in a very happy stage to construct 1 crore house, and they see that how we can correct it further. So I think that is the perspective we should keep. Suddenly becoming very gloomy that we have failed in BLC, we have failed in this, the land is not there, EWS has been neglected, is not going to help us. And that's not the correct narrative also. I will tell you, I think we concentrated upon slum housing prior to a PMAY. Urban poor means basically it was slum. How much slum housing we could construct? The problems which you have diagnosed now about the land, about not having access to the formal finances, microfinance institutions not getting enough strength to get into this. I think these are all serious problems which have been there earlier also, which is now also. To some extent, dent has been made, so that's there. When you talked about BLC getting the maximum thing, and you picked up the question on the case of Andhra Pradesh, I mean, that's little specific to me. When we started this sanction, I think the first CSMC meeting, very few houses came. Chhattisgarh came with, very surprising, Chhattisgarh came with some 3,000 houses. And we were getting something like each CSMC 10,000 houses, 5,000 houses. And we were worried that this, we are thinking of 1 crore, 2 crore houses. And you know, when we started this program, the idea was 2 crore houses have to be built. But we went by a demand survey, which brought it down to 112 lakhs. We have sanctioned 118 lakhs. So I think, but anyway, coming back to third CSMC was a kind of game changer in which Andhra Pradesh came. And Andhra Pradesh came with something like 1 lakh houses. And we were little surprised. We were also little cautious to evaluate. I think if you come back, come somewhere, there's a lot of process change in sanction. Lot of power was given to a state. Otherwise, normally in JNURM, sanction of a project used to take 6-7 months. That's one of the reasons why you don't get number. Here it was all a state level committee, and we were picking up in CSMC, picking up randomly few projects and going into the details of the DPR. So DPR sanction, which used to happen in RE and JNURM, BSUP, all at the mission in the government of India, was all delegated to the state. And that's one thing which you have to notice, practically that changed the whole scenario. Money came, lot of funding came, and lot of change in the business process happened. Now, first, Andhra Pradesh also came with AHP. You know, so I think BLC took over later on, but initial lots of proposals were AHP. In competition, Telangana also came in next CSMC with some 70-80,000, and then Chief Minister used to telephone and speak to us also that how much you will give. I said, see, the North is very much sleeping at this point. No proposal is coming from UP, nothing much is coming from here. So first come, first serve. If South comes first, you will get. So Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Telangana, they got Karnataka also, they got lot of houses in the first thing. But when I think one thing about slum also, ISSR, we used to ask the states that why you don't propose under this in situ slum rehabilitation and why AHP. They said that AHP, I mean, we are going to get big number. And I tell you, in situ slum rehabilitation is a very, very difficult job to do. Then I think something which you mentioned, one of the major problem was also in our guideline, we wrote 1 lakh rupees for in situ. And whereas 1.5 lakhs is for AHP and other verticals. So psychologically, states did not bother much about this. we will get always the states think how much more money you can get from government of India. So this was a kind of problem. I mean, psychologically, or many states agreed also. Why, sir, we will bring in that? So many of the slum people, which could have gone in situ, first of all, you have to do PPP. And I think Mr. Raghav will agree with me. It's very difficult to do real PPP in India. And there are lots of challenges, which I think you know. I have also tried to do a lot of PPP guidelines. So, okay. So I think that is where the kind of problem initiated, and then we kept on doing. CLSS, when CLSS came, we thought perhaps states don't have to do because the way it was structured. So National Housing Bank and HUDCO were the CN. And now we have SBI also in PMI 2.0. So I think that will further help. It had taken lot of energy and resource and pressure from the finance ministry to move banks. What you see CLSS thing, 1 year it was nothing much was happening. In fact, HFCs were willing to come forward and do it, but the commercial nationalized banks were totally disinterested in the beginning in CLSS scheme. So I think with a great difficulty it came. Later on, MIG was added much later. Idea was never to do MIG, but one thing I will tell you, then the whole feeling in the housing ministry was, we have to look for urban poor, and housing is a kind of sector which is the aspiration of everyone. And affordability is not the problem only of EWS, even the middle income group also. If you want to buy a house, I can tell you many of the MIG and HIG people also, I think when we retire, it's very difficult for us to buy a house in Delhi. So it's a problem at every across the income level. So then MIG was added, but later on the focus remained on EIG. See, it's very clear. Banks are very hesitant to give loan to even low income group. But because they have some formal certificate, something to, and there's a lot of pressure from government, so they started very reluctantly doing it. But for EWS, it's very difficult to get any kind of formal thing. We tried to do, I think the present mission also, they must be doing it. Microfinance institutions were ready, but you know, that was the time also, there was lots of problem with MFI sector also. RBI came I mean, there was lots of problem of regulation that the customers getting cheated, lots of scandals were coming up. So somehow MFIs also got lot of regulation. So I think they could not do that much we were expecting them to do. And then we organized a lot of discussion with them how to do it. We went to NHB. NHB also supported, but overall RBI perhaps looks at a much larger economic situation. So I think all those relaxation, empowerment could not come to the MFI. So I think these are some of the things which happened. Now, looking at all of them, these are all the problems directly in the housing sector. But you cannot give little importance to the land. Land remains a major problem. Affordability of housing is also a problem because of land. But land has become extraordinarily costly. I mean, there are various reasons. And it is very difficult to see the PMI, we also had a number of reforms. One thing is in the master plan, you leave some place, because thinking of the smaller cities, that the smaller cities should at least have some zone for the affordable housing, because still there is land available. All those things were done to a great extent. These reforms moved, but I think the reaction is a mixed one. I mean, some states did. The states which took lot of interest, naturally they got more houses, and then the progress, like Gujarat you talked. In fact, we had taken all the state governments people to Gujarat for a kind of workshop for 2-3 days to show them the in situ slum rehabilitation houses. Like how they are able to structure PPP, how they are able to execute. Many of them tried, but somehow the whole milieu is such, maybe when others speak, it's not very easy to do PPP in the slum. I mean, Dharvi is a much bigger thing. Even in Delhi, the Katputli colony, many of you must be knowing. I think we had also visited several times. I think exactly similar thing, lots of good houses. See, you have to also give fact that houses are also very personal property or personal thing. And that is the reason why BLC and CLSS gets more traction, because people given a choice, I will like to go and buy my own house, get some money from government, but I will not like to get into a kind of structure which government is constructing. So AHP, but AHP we thought, I think, and even now perhaps in PMI-2 also, that if some problems can be solved, like maybe the developers will tell, that is something which can bring you a large number, because structures at one level you can bring. But giving right to the slum, patta, I mean, there are lots of things. Many of these slums are actually untenable. I mean, you have to think from other point. Many of them live in a very dangerous kind of location. they are also actually harming some of the natural resources. Maybe in the floodplains, a kind of slum is existing. I think you cannot construct house there. I mean, that's illegal actually. So I think I mean, the life is quite complicated. And one program in a isolation will not be able to solve all the problems. It needs to have a lot of support from the whole ecosystem. And I mean, I have seen your report to say the judicial reform. I mean, these are all very good thing. I mean, not correct thing, but who will do it? Can mission director PMI do it? I mean, when you review PMAY mission or the ministry, I mean, is everything in their hand? How much they can do? There is a limit to advocacy of a ministry also. And 5 years is a very short time. So what I will suggest, and I mean, maybe I'm taking longer time, I think instead of feeling very despondent that we have not achieved much, we should actually look at the strengths. And then the weak points in the PMI 2.0, we should try to do it, which in my opinion will be little more attention on the slum thing. Another thing I will also like all of you to think whether it's right to assume that there is a lot of demand for EWS housing in the metro cities, big cities, whether they will like to do that, because we also have a very old census figure. If you look at the new, I mean, what will be the real census figure and look at what actually drives the housing market, perhaps situation will be different in different cities. So I think we are also going by a lot of stereotype in our research. So I think we'll have to actually take a view on that and see what exactly is the real thing. We did a lot of things, not only looking at a particular slum or a particular group. That's why in PMY, the basic thing is there is something for everyone. Because housing is a complex thing, different groups of urban poor in city. So it's like a menu. You can do this, you can also do that. And idea was a very good housing for all plan of action will be prepared at the city level. And then the tie-up will be there with developers, with slum people, with other people. And then that plan will be implemented. You know, I mean, you think lot of things in idealism. When you get into the number, certain things just go with the speed of construction and all that, and certain things do not happen very nicely in some of the states, some states will not happen. In India, you have so much of diversity among states. Any program you will find lot of changes in the whole landscape. This is not something unusual. You have to expect this to happen and then keep on doing it and then planning it. I mean, what we have done for about 1 crore houses, maybe additional 1 crore in PMY2 with little focusing learning. See, now you are in a better position because bankers are implementing CLSS. They have got used to it. It took 2 years to move them. Now I think they have got used to doing it, so they will do it in your next subsidy program also, or it will be easier. So perhaps we can do it much better. Missions will get little more time to focus upon some of these groups. So I think I will stop at this stage, and then otherwise this is a subject where one can keep on reflecting and telling you a lot of things. Maybe questions and answer I will also get a chance.
Sure, sir. Raghav, coming to you next, and in the spirit of what Mishra sir said, on the spirit of going on, right? We have to keep going on. Now, as a developer, and you have developed actually affordable housing in the NCR region, that too, not in some small city. Your reflections on what is stopping others from venturing into it, or you from doing more, and what is the way to address, and can technology be the answer?
I'll just share 2-3 anecdotes because it's very. So I was in London Business School. We attended a presentation by Monitor Group. आपको मिले होंगे आशीष करमचंदानी. He was championing this affordable housing everywhere, and Vikram was my school business school same school alumni. हमने क्या करते हैं 1 लाख घर बनाते हैं. I came back, शुरू करा. क्या मजा आएगा. Next 1 lakh houses we going to make. हमने नक्शा वक्शा डाला. So we got the land 1 hour from here. So in Pilakwa, there's a city called Pilakwa here. NH24 पे very cheap, good land. बनाने शुरू करे तो पहला चीज वो अर्बन वाला पूछता है प्लानर सर गाड़ी का पार्किंग. मैंने कहा भाई ये 5 लाख का घर है, 5 लाख से कम की गाड़ी आती नहीं. एवरीवन अंडरस्टैंड्स हिंदी राइट. तो यार जिसके पास गाड़ी वो ये घर क्यों लेगा. बोले सर वो आपका प्रॉब्लम है, बायलॉज में तो ये लिखा है. यार क्या बात है. सो वी स्टार्टेड. और खूब मेहनत किया. 6 महीना सब लैंड लेके रखा. साल भर 1-1.5 साल मेहनत किए. सड़क इसमें बोल रहे हैं, सड़क बहुत चौड़ी, ग्रीन्स की सब कुछ. when you start following all those urban planning norms, it was impossible to make the house. And when we filed a PIL against the government कि अब हम गरीबों के लिए घर बनाना चाहते हैं, बनाने नहीं दे रहे.
Yes.
ठीक है, for 2 years. और वहां पे वो it was a I will not take गवर्नमेंट का, जो भी गवर्नमेंट थी उस समय, वो बोले अरे सरकार का काम है यार, तुम मत पढ़ो. मैंने तो वो तुम बनाना क्यों चाहते हो, तुम्हारा क्या स्वार्थ है. मैंने कहा भाई हमारे ग्रैंडफादर के नाम से हमारा मन है, अफोर्डेबल हाउसिंग स्टोरी एज यू वर टोल्ड हम कर रहे हैं. नहीं समझ पाया. We had to lobby it with the state government to get affordable housing policy. 2010 I'm talking about. So this was much before PMAY. फिर हम बहुत बढ़िया 200 घर बेच दिए. We launched at 4.5 lakhs. 4.5 लाख रुपए. अब लोन करने जाए कस्टमर, सब उनको पूछते अच्छा भाई आपका वही शेयर में कितना इन्वेस्टमेंट है, ज्वेलरी कितने लाख की है, एग्जिस्टिंग ओनरशिप हाउस की दिखाओ, ठीक है, और सैलरी इतना होना चाहिए, इतना 2x का कवर दिखाओ, गारंटर लेके आओ.
बिल्कुल.
वो इतने कागज देख के मेरी कंपनी के 250 कस्टमर्स, हमारा CFO, हमने 8 जनों की टीम रखी भाई, इनके किसी तरह लोन हो जाए. सब कुछ होने के बाद एक वो था अजीब अजीब से क्लॉज सरकार के कि जहाँ हाउस है उससे 2 किलोमीटर प्रॉक्सिमिटी में एक और घर होना चाहिए तुम्हारा. क्या क्या यार,
और होना चाहिए, नहीं होना चाहिए.
हाँ होना चाहिए तुम्हारा. अबे मेरा एग्जिस्टिंग घर है तो कोई मेरा घर क्यों लेगा यार,
तो घर मिलना ही नहीं
दिस
चाहिए.
इज फर्स्ट टाइम. हाँ तो तुम यार तुम बना ही कर दो ना. सो मेरा जो कस्टमर था उनका स्कोरिंग सिस्टम होता था सरकारी बैंक्स का, 100 पॉइंट्स में से मिलते थे और 80 पे लोन रिजेक्ट हो जाता है. मेरा कस्टमर 60 से तो शुरू करता था कि मतलब 40 तो कट ही गए ना, कि गाड़ी नहीं है, शेयर में इन्वेस्टमेंट नहीं है, गारंटर नहीं है, 10 लाख रुपए साल की इनकम नहीं है, स्टडी वो नहीं है, तो भाई 40 पॉइंट कट गए. अब 60 से शुरू कर, अब कटते कटते 20-30 से ऊपर जा नहीं रहे. उनको हम समझा नहीं पाते थे इयर्स कि यार एक गरीब का घर है भाई, वो ज्यादा अच्छे से, अभी वो रेंट पे रह रहा है 3,000 रुपए के, वो 3,500 की EMI बेटर देगा, बिकॉज he will shift from rental housing to a ownership housing. One fine day, as we said, in a conference like this, मैं was ranting about it. भाई मैं 3 साल हो गए हैं यार, 1 लाख घर बन जाने चाहिए थे अब तक. अभी मेरा पहला प्रोजेक्ट अटका हुआ है. So you come with big dreams ना, वो नहीं. तो then NHB chief was there, Mr. Ravi Verma ji, and SBI के उस टाइम हेड होते थे भास्कर न्योगी. He called me, बॉम्बे आओ यार करते हैं कुछ. तो he changed the entire norms for affordable housing. Yes. But that time NHB also started giving licenses to HFCs or JS, or 10 Aadhaar, and many came.
NHB actually did lot of proactive things to help. Yes.
इन सब के ऑफिसेस, इनकी पूरी क्रेडिट टीम मेरे ऑफिस में बैठी थी हमारे प्रोजेक्ट पे बैठ के. दे डिड लोन्स. तो सबके फर्स्ट ऑफिस वाज माय प्रोजेक्ट. All of these, most of these HFCs, because we were the first ones in Delhi and probably in India to do it without any subsidy. 4.5 lakh rupee house, completely land bought by us, complete delivery. तो ऑटो वाला आके अपने घर में रहता है. आज you can go, we have built more than 1,200 homes in this project, all living successfully delivered. Amazing project. From that onwards, 2014 PMAY came. I must appreciate, seriously, I must appreciate the work that PMAY has done is immense. On ground, I am talking about, it is immense. So if sir has been the Sutradhar, and so I must say, we must acknowledge his work in this sector. Building 1 crore houses in a country like India, delivering it to the last mile person, not an easy job. You go to any Lakhampur, Khidi, Bareilly, Banaras, कहीं चले जाओ,
प्रोजेक्ट है.
आप गांव में जाके पूछो भाई सरकार का घर मिला, 80% 90% बोला हाँ जी मिला. पैसा आया टाइम पे, हाँ जी आया टाइम. So most of the people have got the houses. I ask my drivers, I ask people around me, जो भी मिलता है, कभी आप भी चल के पूछ लो, गाजियाबाद में राह चलते से पूछो भाई कोई घर की समस्या. So we have got houses. Second was the numbers. Sir made a very good point. The initial number, I think, to begin with, I don't know how the data was collected. I think it was wrong.
Yes, yes.
We didn't require 3 crore houses in India.
बिल्कुल ही गलत था.
वो डेटा ही गलत था, जिसपे पूरा देश का स्टोरी बिल्ड हो गया. हम चले आए लंदन से कि यार 3 करोड़ में से 1 लाख में तो बनानी है. That data was wrong. After this project, I launched 2 more projects in affordable housing segment. In one of the projects, again in EHP, समाजवादी योजना है उसमें, हमने भी made that.
लोहिया हाउसिंग होता था यूपी में.
लोहिया के बाद समाजवादी
भी आया था.
And I was, sir, your schooling was very instrumental in making that policy.
एक साल तो यूपी में हम इसमें स्ट्रगल किए कि इसका नाम प्रधानमंत्री नहीं मुख्यमंत्री आवास योजना करो, तब हम इम्प्लीमेंट करें. इन यूपी we lost 2015 completely.
ये I will
15,
compare to
16.
that. नहीं आ रहे थे स्कीम ही नहीं, तो फिर
Scheme-
समाजवादी योजना बनी तब आ गया.
So these are also factors you have to say.
और उनकी डेफिनेशन अलग, PMAY की जो कारपेट एरिया की डेफिनेशन है वो अलग, समाजवादी ने उन्होंने अपनी निकाल दी. उनमें कारपेट एरिया अलग है, उसमें बालकनी का एरिया अलग है. तो वी वर मैचिंग सर की कौन से एरिया से ग्रांट मिलेगी, वो हमें सब्सिडी मिलेगी, कौन से नहीं मिलेगी. तो 3 डिफरेंट स्कीम्स को साथ में रख के घर बनाए. इतना फनी है सर, आधे घरों में हमारे प्रोजेक्ट में स्कीम है, आधे में नहीं है. कोई 5 मीटर ऊपर है, कोई 5 मीटर नीचे है, तो 5 मीटर ऊपर वाले में नहीं है, 5 मीटर वाले में नहीं, बिकॉज ऑफ द just because of the definition. So that brings to the second subject. It is a state subject. A lot of it depends on the state. There is, I think, limited that center limitation that the
Yes.
center has, and I think center has done a fairly good job. I will, you should give the credit where it's due. सर्वे गलत थे, वो अब ठीक हो ही रहे हैं. तो मेरे हाँ, so what says when we launched projects, sir, one of our समाजवादी projects, the आपको interesting fact बताता हूँ. The most failed product that failed to sell was 1 BHK. जो सबसे सस्ता घर था वही नहीं बिका. जो सबसे महंगा घर था 3 BHK वो सबसे ज्यादा बिका.
आप बिल्कुल सही कहते. यही मैं बोल रहा था ना कि we have to understand what exactly is the demand.
So मुझे
Instead of thinking सबसे छोटे इनकम वाले हमने नैनो लाया था ना कि लेंगे,
नहीं चली
क्या
ना.
हुआ उसका? People have very different aspiration now.
अलग सोच अलग है वो. We also studied that. तो फिर हमने पूरा नक्शा रिवाइज करके तोड़ के फिर 3 BHK बनाए. वो बहुत तेजी से बिक रहे हैं. हाँ, तो मैंने एक और अफोर्डेबल हाउसिंग प्रोजेक्ट करा मेरठ में कि भैया तो तुरंत बिक जाएंगे. अब अभी भी सर 10-12 लाख रुपए में लॉन्च किया था, आज भी 17-18 लाख में दे रहा हूं मैं. रिंग रोड पे है, फैंटास्टिक प्रोडक्ट. जैसा ये है बिल्कुल इसी का कॉपी. G+3, नो लिफ्ट, ब्यूटीफुल प्रोजेक्ट. वो नो ऑफ टेक. 6 साल हो गए लॉन्च कर हुए, 5 यूनिट महीने की बिकती नहीं है. हम सोचे थे कि पहले दिन 600 यूनिट बेचेंगे, फिर अगला फेज. ठीक है, सो दैट तो why is it happening? सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम, and she has mentioned duly in her report, हिंदुस्तान में 3 कारण हैं इसके. पहला जो EWS बायर है, where is he living right now? Housing is just not house. It is one interesting fact. It is travel to your workplace. आपके वर्क प्लेस से आपकी हाउसिंग डिफाइन होती है. बिकॉज इफ यू आर ट्रैवलिंग 2 hours और उस गरीब आदमी को जिसका 25,000-20,000 तनख्वाह है और वो 4,000 रुपए बस के किराए में दे रहा है, तो वो घर नहीं लेगा कितना भी अच्छा हो. सो व्हाट हैपेंस इज, जो स्लम है वो उसमें बहुत नरकीय जीवन जीता है जस्ट बिकॉज द वर्क प्लेस इज 5 minutes अवे. आज यहाँ पे कोई आपका स्वीपर होगा, उससे पूछो कहाँ रहते हो. हाँ, वो बहुत हेवी रेंट दे रहा होगा यहाँ बाजू के किसी स्लम में, कॉलोनी में रहने के लिए. उससे कम मेरी EMI होगी मेरठ में. बट ऐसा नहीं होगा ना कि वो मेरठ में EMI दे के अपना घर ओन करे और रोज 1.5 घंटा चल के यहाँ पे झाड़ू लगा के फिर 1.5 घंटा चला के वापस जाए.
He will be happy to stay in a useless place but close to his office.
अरे क्लोज ऑफिस. और यहाँ पे लैंड का प्रॉब्लम है बिकॉज दिस सेंटर ऑफ द कैपिटल. आई थिंक आई विल गो फास्ट. इंफ्रा बेनिफिट सर ने दिया. सर मैं बहुत तारीफ किया, थोड़ा सा आई विल पुट द अदर पार्ट. इंफ्रा का बेनिफिट नहीं ले पाया प्राइवेट सेक्टर. आई डोंट थिंक सो. एक भी जना शायद हिंदुस्तान में कोई सूरता होगा ले पाया होगा. बट आई थिंक नोबडी हैज बीन एबल टू टेक द इंफ्रा बेनिफिट इन द स्कीम.
The priority sector lending.
प्राइवेट सेक्टर इंफ्रा बेनिफिट नहीं ले पाया बिकॉज़ देयर वाज टू मेनी लिमिटेशन. 5 साल होना चाहिए कंप्लीशन और ऑल दैट. कंस्ट्रक्शन हो नहीं पाता.
Right.
कंस्ट्रक्शन का
बड़ी मुश्किल से वो हमने इंक्लूड करवाया था.
इट वाज अ ब्यूटीफुल.
3 times we were rejected. In I think our 4th meeting finally we could get RBI and finance secretary to approve it.
but nobody was able to
But
take
again, I mean, they didn't have their heart to implement it.
नहीं हुआ. दूसरा, कंस्ट्रक्शन हैज इट्स ओन इश्यूज. आई विल क्विकली रन. हीट, हिंदुस्तान में 4 वेदर है, गर्मी which is 50 degrees you can't construct, सर्दी which means pollution you can't construct, rain which means you can't construct, और बचे हुए टाइम में festivals that means you can't construct. ठीक है? So
इसलिए स्पीड देखिए आप
so the speed हमेशा हर एक का delay ही है, and there is grab 4 grab 2 grab 1, what do you do? You can't make houses, ये बहुत मुश्किल है. और अगर हाई राइज चलेगा तो कब कैसे 30 माले तक बनाते बनाते सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम है दीपरपिता जी, why this is not functioning is urban planning. हाँ, which is a state subject. आप स्टडी कीजिएगा, the states which have done well have amazing urban planning.
Yes.
I went to Gujarat myself to study. You go to Gujarat, Ahmedabad के चारों ओर they've made a ring road. 1 kilometer inside the ring road, they have declared it as an affordable housing zone where only affordable housing of limited size can come, and they have provided spokes for travel into the city. This is the only reason why AHP did well
Yes.
in Ahmedabad, because developers could construct it. For me to construct it in Ghaziabad, I have to compete with a 8,000 rupees foot wala home and construct it and then deliver it at 3,000 rupees. And aggregate the land with individual farmers at हो ही नहीं पाता, because the जो पीछे की जमीन है उस पे इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर ही नहीं पहुंचा हुआ. तो अगर जो पीछे की जमीन है उस पे इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पहुंच जाए, and if you declare affordable housing zones, I think Gujarat is the only state which has done it, and it is the only outcome that which will make the affordable housing possible in the country. Second is land का LARR Act. So acquisition is a problem बड़े townships में. Last, I think I had a lot of things, but it'll come in the discussion. Is prices. So this was made in 2010. In 2010, the price of this bottle, glass bottle, would have been 300 rupees or 200 rupees, let us say. Land that I bought, the price was 500 rupees gaj. 500 rupees a square yard. This bottle is 300 rupees in 2010. Fast forward 2024. This bottle is 300 ki jagah 400 ho gaya. Right? But the land that was 500 rupees, you can't find any land less than 10,000 rupees in that area. The land has gone
So much.
So real estate in India, if you look at, हमने साइंस में हर चीज में ना ऑप्टिमाइज कर लिया है. पहले 1 एकड़ में इतना गेहूं उगता था, तो अब इतना गेहूं उग रहा है. पहले एक लैपटॉप 30,000 का बिकता था, आज भी 30,000 का है. So we have and 20x the capacity. लैंड इंसान नहीं बना पाया है. So land क्योंकि limited scarce resource है, so we say the inflation is 7-8%, but I think the inflation in land, the CAGR of would be 15 to 20%.
Yeah, at least.
तो जाके एवरेज इन्फ्लेशन 7-8% आया है. सो खाने का प्राइस वो उतना ही दे रहा है, लेकिन घर का कीमत हैज गॉन 20x if I say with the prices of the land. So फिर भी इतना हम दे पा रहे हैं. This is a big thing. So answer is definitely टेक्नोलॉजी में कुछ बहुत अच्छा रेडिकल चेंज कर दें. एलन मस्क स्पेस पे जा सकता है तो कुछ बना भी. व्हाट आर द मटेरियल्स वी आर यूजिंग? मटेरियल्स पिछले 200 साल में कंस्ट्रक्शन के चेंज नहीं हुए. वही सीमेंट और जिप्सम निकल रहा है, वही सरिया लग रहा है, वही कंक्रीटिंग हो रही है. वी ट्राइड डिफरेंट टेक्नोलॉजीज आल्सो, बट नथिंग वर्कड. एक आध बार हमने वो प्रीफैब भी ट्राई किया. So the cost is in fact more expensive than cheaper for a prefab. वो contractor को train करना, labor को train करना, फिर वो इतने सारे issues.
Unless you are making 20,000 houses maybe in 6 months, it doesn't make sense.
That doesn't happen.
Scale.
और उसमें भी मैं पुणे में प्रोजेक्ट विजिट करके आया था जोश सिल्वा का. उन्होंने बनाया 20,000 घर से प्रीफैब से. People said यार थर्माकोल के घर में नहीं रहना.
Yeah, that is also right.
अभी नहीं रोक सकते.
उस पे बहुत हम
the rather acceptance.
PMI 2.0 में उसके लिए एक्स्ट्रा पैसा भी दे रहे हैं to promote that. Now they are trying to drive that.
So whatever technology that आपका आंसर था, इस टेक्नोलॉजी आंसर right now whatever technology is,
It is not.
वो ज्योमेट्रिक प्रोग्रेशन में बढ़ा है.
Yeah.
राइट, सॉरी अर्थमेटिक प्रोग्रेशन में बढ़ा है. और लैंड बढ़ गया है ज्योमेट्रिक प्रोग्रेशन में. वो हर 3 साल में डबल हो रहा है लैंड. टेक्नोलॉजी हर 3 साल में आधा नहीं हो रहा. सो दैट इज आई थिंक बहुत सारी बातें बीच में करेंगे.
Right. Coming to you now, Shahana. Okay. And on the issue of slum housing, right, which has been the focus points of not just PMAY-U, but for urban housing policies over the last 2-3 decades, even more. and before that of state housing, various state housing policies. Whether it's upgradation, whether it's rehabilitation, or whether it's redevelopment, okay? Each is as challenging as the other, okay? Based on your work, not only in the Indian subcontinent, but across Latin America and your understanding of the African subcontinent, what has worked, China, etc.
Oh,
What do you see?
so your initial question was about why it hasn't worked in India, and I'm going to look at that right now
Sure.
rather than solutions. So I actually haven't studied housing and slums for quite a while. I'm just coming back to it, and it was, your paper was one of the first things that got me into that. WRI now is starting to look at housing again, and in the Equitable Development Center, we look at tenure security. So it kind of reconnected with that. So I had studied SRS housing in Bombay long before the PMAY. So I don't know much about that beyond what I've read in your excellent and a very illuminating report. And I was really impressed at the scale of the housing that's been achieved. But as I told you, it wasn't surprising, right? Especially the findings that in smaller towns. And I think that's a really critical finding. The way that housing markets and also urban economies and land markets work in small town India is very, very different from the metro cities. And they, in some ways, are both more intractable. But I think also we can start thinking of how we can work better with existing market sort of solutions that exist in these places. So the SRS, so one of the things that I was surprised about when I was, so in my work in Bombay was looking at the, this was in 2008 to 10. And I kept going back, but looking at there was an attempt to make Bombay Shanghai a sort of complete urban renewal, right? There was this idea that the high land prices would create a model where you could, get all good things very easily at free, right? So with no cost, you could get like urban renewal, you could get free houses for slum dwellers, and the land market itself would do that through cross subsidies. And I remember that, and that the SRS itself is a fairly mixed project. You've read Mukhija's book, right? And one thing is, it actually did, I believe, produce more housing than public housing did earlier. And I think we need to go back to why that hasn't worked. But I was very surprised later when I came back to India and things that the SRS and this in situ market-based slum redevelopment where you get free houses in exchange for private market rate housing, that was being adopted as a best practice across India, because logically that didn't make sense at all. And I'll go into, so I guess the points, one is first talk a little bit about why, just from a logical, market or policy perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Then also from an equity perspective, what are the really real problems with this? Then I think the next question you had raised this, right? That housing is not just about houses. And then the slum problem or solution, whatever it is, that's not really a housing question. It's a livelihoods question. It's an economic question. So I think if we try to solve the slum problem through the lens of housing, we're not going to go anywhere.
Yes,
So
absolutely right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Livelihood
problem. It's a livelihood.
Yeah, and it's an economic problem, and it has to do with the nature of our economy and things. So I'll discuss that a little bit. And maybe the last question, I think I'll go back to now that the second phase of the PMAY is being designed. And I think we need to go back to some of the fundamental questions of what is the goal of this housing scheme? What role should the federal government play? I think we talked a lot now about Samaj Sarkar Bazaar. That's important, but within each, what should the actual role be of each? And I do have a question about why should the government be subsidizing private home ownership for middle income people? I don't think that that's a good use of public resources. I think and especially in a context where you can think about why, one maybe a better way to solve the housing and land problem is to improve the availability of infrastructure outside the major cities and things, right? So I think that's a very fundamental question that we need to ask. So back to the SRS in Bombay, right? So It was, so as you know, this was, it was initially a political promise, right? And then the bureaucrats were asked, how do you resolve this? And it was a political promise at a time when Bombay land prices were skyrocketing. And at that point, it made sense. And it also made sense because people believed, one, that they could cap the benefits. They had a cutoff date. So that was one of the first problems, right? And Mekla had made a very interesting point in the Janagraha thing yesterday, which was that the Indian social contract for rural people is that we will give you, so we have only a rural welfare state, right? We don't have that in cities, but we will give you all these things, but you stay here. You don't come to, and that has constantly been. So it's like, okay, no more people can come. The ones who are already there and in Bombay, they do have more political rights and more salience. So there is some attempt to provide them houses and other sorts of goods. Like, as long as no more people come, we will build you houses. Now, so that one is that even within Bombay, so it did actually produce a fair bit of houses, but it even within, say, the Bombay region, it only makes sense in certain sort. First of all, the land has to be, Bombay has some very, very tiny slums, but the ones that are the most viable will be the ones where, and there is, though the land is technically free, in reality, it's not free. It will be in areas where you can actually sell it at a very high rate. The second thing is the land is really tiny. So when you get that in situ thing and you're allowed to build higher and higher, you're just building a vertical slum. Now, what that means often is that, you know, when I was in SPA, we used to study all these things about how rural people don't want to live in high rises and all of that. Now, it's not a cultural issue. The problem is usually the lifts don't work.
Yes.
There is no power. So imagine being on an 8th floor where the lift is not working. Very often, and also when you're looking at these as single buildings, and this is the problem with either centralized schemes or purely housing focused scheme, what you are having on this small plot of land, which was earlier occupied by people who used very few services, you have now like these very wealthy homes which are using a lot more services. You need more power, more water, everything, right? Definitely more cars are coming in. There's no system of planning around it, right? So again, so in that way, it causes larger problems. So the lifts don't work. It becomes difficult for so I mean, in slum areas, you do use outdoor spaces a lot and things, right? And there's no increase in the other sorts of services. Now, so those are some of the equity problems. Another problem, of course, is this whole thing of eligibility, right? Like one of the things, it's very difficult. You have to prove that you as an individual were in that house. Now, the way there is a very active rental market and housing market there, but because you do actually have rights as a tenant, and there is also a right of adverse possession. So if you think of that, the slum dwellers are not really getting the land for free. Who's getting the land for free are developers. Now, slum dwellers, most of them who are eligible, have been living and to whatever extent improving the land, paying their taxes, have got state services. By the law of adverse possession, they do actually have some sort of right to the land, right? So they are not getting anything for free. Now, what is happening, most of it is state-owned land. The developers, you had mentioned they're getting a small share. I think earlier there wasn't even a share of the profits. But basically what you're getting is state-owned land is being given free to developers. So that is really problematic. And there's no money coming back. I think even the money that goes to the state may be going to the SRS, which is usually a state level body. What the municipality is not getting anything. So they have to now provide a whole lot more services. So these are the many reasons why this is a very flawed model, and it can only work in Bombay. I think Gujarat is an interesting point. And that said, I do know there are cases where it's been successful, right? I know these individuals who have got really nice centrally located houses, but that's probably a handful. I think even in Bombay, it hasn't really made a dent in the housing. And there's no way it can cope with this, the continual need and demand for housing. So more slums will come much faster than these can be redeveloped. I think Gujarat is an interesting case. I mean, of course, Gujarat has much better planning capacity.
Yes.
So that is really an important thing to understand
Urban planners,
and
yes.
develop it across. So that's across the board, right? It's the capacity of its municipal governments, it's much better. And I think there is another, maybe not Ahmedabad so much, but the fact that it's an industrial city, I think also makes a difference, right? There is more interest in ensuring that workers have a reasonable place to stay, which, and now I'm coming back to this, like not looking at slums as a problem of housing. Now, this Herbert Marcuse, the social and political theorist, when he was talking about the housing crisis in the UK, right, with the advent of capitalism, he had said that this housing crisis is not because the system is not working, it's because this is how the system works. And I think that is very much the case of slums in India. As I think you had made it clear, there is no way that the formal state or market system can produce housing in the large cities at the scale and speed that we need. And there is also the elites or the government or does not want them to stay, and the economy is not intended to absorb them in formal manufacturing jobs, right? They're very like footloose labor now, almost just-in-time labor. So the slum needs to be very flexible, which informal housing really is, right? It can take 10, a few hundred new workers are needed at a certain time because there's a demand. So it works very well. So that's why a lot of people say it's a solution versus a problem, and it's a very inequitable one. So I think if we want to address that, we need to look at one, the larger economy, then also it's a social and political thing as well, right? Where housing, right? Your networks are there. And if you are very often when people are rehoused from a slum and sent somewhere else, they don't have access to livelihoods. They often have fewer and worse public services, and their networks also break down. Often because the main way that poor people get public services in India is through politics, and that connection breaks down when they're pushed outside. And I guess so this is, and my last point again is this question that I will throw out is really what should be the goal of a housing program, and what should the government focus on and subsidize?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, there are actually many faces in the audience itself today who could have been on this side of the stage. So without further ado, I will just open up the floor for questions from the audience. So please, Mike.
So for those who were present in the presentation I made, some of it may be a bit of repetition of the theme that I was pursuing then. So at the heart of the whole problem is the price of land. Let's take that as the starting point. There is also an issue of cost of construction, but not so much as is the issue of the price of land. Now, there are calculations which have been made and which I talked about here itself in this room, which is that even if you were to provide decent housing for everybody in the country, including the current slum dwellers, including everybody, you don't need more than 1% of the land of India. Now, if that is the extent to which the land requirement we have, then the basic premise of a whole lot of policies, schemes, thinking that land scarcity. Now, that itself falls. Land is not scarce. Let's start with that. So now, if we accept the point that land is not scarce, then of course we run into the question, why is it expensive? And it is that which I was trying to deal with. And I think that has to be an important part of the whole issue. Otherwise, we will not go far in that.
Please go.
Thank you. I have a question for Raghav. My name is Nalin Kohli. I represent a small and medium industry association in knowledge industries. One thing which is coming to my mind after listening to you, we are now developing because India feels that we are not having enough manufacturing jobs. So on a very massive scale, we are creating these corridors and big industrial hubs, like 5,000, 6,000 acres. I ran an industry myself in Noida many years ago, and we used to send buses all over the place to get the workers. And this very important point of linking the workplace to a house, I think is very key. Now, like China, can we now think of these low-cost housing as part of these mega industrial structures? Because because you are at a planning stage, that would
I
probably.
think government is doing that, sir, and they are doing it well. For example.
Maybe you could, maybe you could educate us.
Yeah, so I think government is doing, so I'm not an expert of industrial housing, but all these estates, government, for example, I know this large township policies are coming, integrated high-tech township policies. So most of the integrated townships and the group housing policies, it is mandated to have 10% EWS and 10% LIG to be built for this segment, and it is working well. Because now the developer will cross subsidize that cost into the housing. So while making those 8,000 rupees square foot a house, he knows he has to make a EWS also just next to his in the project. So these kind of, and then there is area requirements. So this is happening.
Supposing there's a need, would a builder like you be interested in?
If it makes a commercial sense, definitely. Why would millions like me will come now?
Sure.
Industrial housing, for example, it depends on in fact, industrial housing is the best because there is a captive customer. Because आपको बेचना नहीं है, so your marketing cost is down, and then there is a surety of payment for the banks. So banks are happy, customer is happy, they have their livelihood next to the project. Industrial housing is the best project logically.
I remember early days of Noida, there was no restaurant there. We had first a Nerula there. There was no eating place. And what we call, if you want to attract a foreign investor, for example, we look at soft infrastructure.
Yes.
You need school, you need hospital, you need,
McDonald's है.
So I think if this work is planned like that, because workers invariably were coming from nearby villages or slums, really from
Industrial
slums.
housing is a wonderful project, sir.
Yes. So
I think Apple, when they announced their facility, they talked about also building some 1 lakh houses, I think, for their.
I was just thinking if we can correlate these two things,
Yes, I think
converge. It may.
That is what the state governments will do, sir, or the central government. State governments को बनाना
Tamil
पड़ेगा.
Nadu, they're doing that.
Tamil Nadu, yes.
Started also big time under the ARHC scheme, right? The
Yes.
affordable rental housing
Rental housing
complex
also,
itself
complex.
under
Dormitory
PMAY
housing as well. Yeah,
that you
dormitory
fit
housing.
as rental housing.
It's a
Right?
separate segment, but I think it is working and there's a good.
Yes. I think there is a lot of connectivity inbuilt into that, and
Yes.
so you are having more probability of success in this.
Symbiotic है, integrated है. It's the best form of.
जो Ahmedabad का बोल रहे थे is actually something.
I think so.
Yeah, because there's a
Let's take that this conversation outside. Mukta.
First of all, it's really good to see a solid report on the scheme out here, and thanks for doing it. Couple of things on the state experiences. I think that's something that it would be great if you can pursue. It's not just Andhra Pradesh, also the Odisha scheme. So the idea that a centralized scheme was taken by states and then sort of your state level political thinking was somehow integrated with that has happened in so many different forms across. I think it would be amazing to document that. Because the lessons will not just be for housing. That kind of thinking is a lesson for any kind of a scheme where the center and the state have to collaborate. And the second point I wanted to make in terms of when I'm thinking of the next iteration of the scheme, and many more new responses are going to come, but as a researcher, to close out what happened in PMA by Urban 1.0 is really important, I think. The second thing was the issue with land tenure. So you brought up, Andhra Pradesh and maybe the patta giving, whatever, but closing out that and the intersections with the DLRM, IMP or other kind of initiatives of the government, which are about digitizing land records. That's also an area where I think there's been a lot of struggle going on, which needs some sort of closure, which also, because the BLC component will come to a natural cap. You will run out of people who
Yes,
can
yes.
prove ownership to
And
land.
have land, yes.
So how will you grow that in PMAY
Which possibly
2.0?
we might, find in PM 2.0.
So,
But
so
we don't
there,
know
I
how
think
it will
the
shape up.
innovation of the state will move to
Hmm.
this sort of convergence of your land record digitization, because it is that they have the land, they're living on their own land, but they can't prove that it is theirs.
Yes.
Either it's tribal land or it's ancestral land, or there are all these things. So in PMA, by the first phase, NGOs played a lot of role in bridging this gap. So there were a lot of soft interventions like Vanshavali Banana, for instance, and then convincing the Parshad, the municipal councillor, to sign off on a Vanshavali and then using that as paperwork to actually prove ownership. And every state has its own equivalent of this kind of workaround.
Yeah, and
But
has done
we
it also.
are not able to convert the workaround into a formal
Yes.
process.
This will be very important.
So that, I think, is the second area where analyzing what has happened in the first part can actually provide very, very specific lessons for PMAY 2.0.
Yeah, I didn't cover it in the presentation today, right? Because it is already happening. It has already happened in PMAY 1.2 and it will happen in 2.0, right? I rather flagged up in my presentation those rather the continuous structural breakdown where things are not really, making sense, that it's really, hitting a wall. How to get beyond
The
that?
point is also that
See,
to the data work, I
Hmm.
think some case study work may need to be added to sort of complete the story and the narrative, which can then really be used by policymakers. And Sir's point to what can MoHUA do? Because MoHUA can't change every other
Yeah,
ministry.
absolutely.
So that,
And in
that
terms of, getting the case studies, it is not the best practices as we were just discussing. Okay. It is also the failed projects. If for AHP 50% have been cancelled, why have they been cancelled? When was the decision of no go taken? Who did it? Who did, take that? Those are very important points because unless you solve that, you do not know, what your solutions should be. Coming to us for that, please give us the solution. Let's structurally, systematically, empirically, evidence-wise break down the problem, understand it.
That's why
First.
what you suggested in your report also to take some case by case, some thematic
Yes.
TLSS, and I think that has to be done now. And what Mukta said, actually that was intended design also, that you give flexibility to the states. So I think jo aapki priority, because planning for the entire country in uniform way is a very wrong thing, which happens in most of our program. When we start centrally sponsored programs, it was not done here. There are choice at the city level of different kinds of housing. There is a choice to the state. We did not fix earlier the state share. Normally, all the centrally sponsored scheme will be 60-40 or some sort of thing. We actually said, and I think there is, I think you kept on raising about the subsidy becoming very high for the BLC. It was very clearly known that if we make 60-40, it will be impossible for us to complete because the fund requirement will be so huge. So it's very important for Government of India to plan and cap its share. 1 crore ghar, 1.5 lakhs. You multiply, this is the ultimate thing. Otherwise, with inflation, it will become so. So what will happen? You will sanction the house, you will not have money to complete them. It will be even more disastrous. So interest, and then as Raghav very rightly said, people's aspirations are different. It is not impossible for them to mobilize 2 lakhs rupees, 3 lakhs rupees. If they are having land, if they are getting house, people mobilize and construct actually better house. I have personally seen people have added extra room also in their house slowly from 1.5 lakhs rupees and all that. So that's why I think we knew our limitation that you cannot. Telangana started with a 2-bedroom house. Very, very ambitious thing, but impossible to execute. The cost becomes 7 lakhs, 8 lakhs, and the state was giving everything, nothing from beneficiary. They could not complete it beyond 1 or 2 demonstration projects in Hyderabad.
Right.
They could not do it.
Right. Vanushi, ma'am, I will come to you. Vanushi.
Thank you for this very good report. I will focus basically on this BLC, which has given us a lot of numbers. Yeah? So again, if you just look at houses, yes, it's very impressive. But if you look at the quantum of money, you can only consider it as a catalytic money, yeah, because it has generated a whole lot of funding into housing, which is personal funds basically, yeah, or borrowed or whatever it is. And so I think that is what really needs to be looked at. that how much has this small amount of funding actually generated for investment in housing. That's one thing. The other is that, we say that it's great that, in the smaller cities, you have, PLC, which has been very successful. But unfortunately, most of these houses do not have water supply and sanitation arrangements. Yeah. Because these smaller municipalities did not have the budget to provide for it. Yeah. And that's an essential part of housing. Yeah. Like if you go to Madhya Pradesh, where 2 lakh pattas were given in the smaller towns just to be able to do your PLC housing, yeah, the municipalities, threw up their hands. They said, we cannot provide water and, do sanitation arrangements. So that remains a big question when we're talking about housing. This is certainly something which needs to go with the house. So so I think when we go, step into PMAY-2, I think this is something which has to be given a lot of importance. And that's why you also find vacant houses, yeah? Because in a lot of houses, you don't have water supply. Even a lot of AHP houses, which were constructed in Andhra Pradesh, the poor chief minister was lobbying for money from the center to be able to provide water supply to these HP housing. And people were just not moving in. So I think this is absolutely essential. And related to that is that, if people have ownership of the land, whatever it is, incrementally, they can invest on the house. But there's no way that they can get infrastructure unless the state facilitates it. So I think that is an essential part of it. And so the streamlining of all these, missions with PMAY-2 becomes very important so that ultimately this infrastructure thing happens. The second point I want to make is that, even though there is a technology submission which is part of PMAY, but this technology submission has not really helped the vertical which has produced the numbers. Yeah, that is the PLC. And you see in several places, things that have happened is that, when people, for instance, buy, 2 bags of cement, they pay much more than if they could be bulk purchase and several of them could get together and, So these kinds of to facilitate these kinds of arrangements, then also kind of use of local technologies, which, whatever is viable, to see that whatever is built is safe and healthy is very important. Yeah. So that is, I think, something which needs to be looked at. And also, I think it's very important that with the climate change and all this heat island effects and things like that, I think we need to look at that part of it, which is building housing which is healthier and which is resilient as well.
Yes.
Jayashree.
A few years ago, in Magic Bricks, when the PMAY was doing well, we went out and asked a lot of people at the base of the pyramid: maids, auto drivers, cooks, local workers, and all that. We asked them, "Will you buy the house?" None of them will buy the house in the large cities because, one, they don't have security of job tenure. If they work in Noida and after 6 months, if they're going to work in Gurgaon, the house is like a millstone around their neck, right?
Very, very
So
important.
they don't want it, but they do want basic affordable rental housing,
Yes.
which has
Yes.
Bijli, Pani, and my bap who will protect them from the cops. This was the basic thing.
Yes.
And they wanted, they wanted schools, primary schools and primary healthcare in a 10-minute radius, but they were willing to travel for higher education or higher medical facilities wherever it was available. Now now look at this in this format. The city has done very well. It's not that they sleep only on footpaths. Wherever the land is outside the formal planning system, the chaudharis, these landlords, they use their land.
Yeah.
They create 5-story structures, which is not built into any urban planning. They have individual rooms. They have common toilets. They have a couple of one floor of premium, which means that you will get a kitchen to yourself or a toilet to yourself. So clearly, if the state does not plan for them, the city plans for itself. And these are always full. If it was not commercially viable, the Chaudharis would never have run it.
Right.
Why can't we take a leaf out of the Chaudharis' understanding and whatever the cities function on land that is outside the planned areas. So I
But
feel
that's
that
why
somewhere that
Because
also needs to
two
be
reasons,
studied and-
Jayashree ji. One, they don't have to pay any external development charges to the authority, so that whole lot of money saves. They don't have to follow any planning norms. So 9 मीटर की सड़क की जगह 3 मीटर की सड़क पे भी काम चल जाएगा. नाला नहीं भी बनाओगे तो भी चल जाएगा. पानी का थोड़ा आता है थोड़ा नहीं आता है चल जाएगा. बिजली का तार लटका है तो भी चल जाएगा. So it is called unauthorized development in India, or that is the biggest competition for affordable housing.
But it works better, right?
It works,
works.
actually.
There's a reason why it's more competitive.
So क्योंकि planning beautifully she said planning norms आसान कर दो ना. वो तुम्हें वो मंजूर है.
Said in that conference, when he said you do not allow us to make.
मैंने बोला ना मुझे तो या तो 70 फुट का सड़क दोगे या फिर वो बेचारा 3 फुट की सड़क पे है. बीच का कुछ कर दो ना भाई. Right, and same with everything else. Either you want to make a CP out of it or you want to make a slum out of it, and then later you will regularize that slum.
Yes.
It is so inhuman. In first instance, can't you plan better?
Actually, Gujarat is much better at this as well, right?
Yes.
They're much
Yes.
better at working with informality, and that's also so for many of these chaudharis and landlords, that is the main way in which they become part of the urban economy.
Yes.
And in Gujarat, they kind of understand that.
They're
So
more
they kind of
practical in-
allow it, they're more practical. They understand that the village area will expand. They put in basic services. Because I was doing this comparative study of Gujarat and UP, right? Industrial enclaves. And it was as different as India and China in some ways, the state capacity difference.
We are already 5 minutes past our time. One last question.
Sorry, one quick question.
Sure.
To my mind, there appears to be a flip side for infrastructure. So like you both were mentioning, the moment in a house electricity comes or water supply comes, gentrification happens. That happened with Vasant Kunj back in the 80s. It was a low income area. Same happened with Manhattan. So do we have a counter for that? And the second thing that I was thinking is, statistically speaking, home loan defaults are the lowest, less than 2%. So what is it that is hindering microfinance institutions to come forward and give people loans so that they can get houses for themselves?
Can I take that answer? Yeah. So here I have
What was the
actually
first question? I didn't get that.
Gentrification.
when gentrification. Yeah.
Gentrification.
So to the microfinance question, actually, our fourth panelist, Mr. Jayesh Shah, who was a whole-time director with Swatantra Microfinance Housing Corporation, could not join us today due to a personal exigency, and he has sent me his responses over email. And he says that first and foremost, it's the preset mindset of the financial institution who consider this segment as risky.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Second, the majority of the yes. Yeah, that's Jayesh's response. You can take it up with him later. A majority of the EWS households are employed in the informal sector and therefore have no formal documentation of their incomes, etc. Most financial institutions do not have an inclination or the capability to assess such incomes to underwrite loans to this segment. The ticket size of this loan to this, EWS segment is small. And as you mentioned in your video, it's one file for the loan officer. I would rather go after a 15 lakh or 50 lakh loan rather than go after a 5 lakh.
Yes.
The financial literacy in this segment, EWS segment, is relatively poor and hence requires a lot of hand-holding, explaining the terms of the loan and keeping things simple for the customer to understand. This needs spending more time with the customer, explaining and educating them, with the sales team finds difficult in view of their stiff targets. These customers do not even know that there is an opportunity for them to own a house many a times. Not enough communication is being done, outreach. And most of these customers do not have a credit history, of course, for long-term loans, and therefore the credit bureau reports do reflect a very distinct picture of their, repayment capacity. There are also some supply side challenges, which is the availability of low-cost houses for EWS households. Where's the formal supply? The formal supply is not there. Okay. Apart from the Chaudhary built houses, for which they will anyway not get loans. Except for, and then lack of infrastructure and accessibility to the few EWS projects, except in Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, and lack of interest from private sector builders. A few who are interested do not have a good experience. Challenges related to legal titles to the land, making access to finance difficult, and lack of clear guidelines and policies by the state governments for affordable housing. Exceptions again, according to him, being Andhra Pradesh and Odisha. Raghav, the first part of the question on gentrification, if you could answer. Manhattan and
I think the answer is this is how it works. So city takes itself. I don't know. If you don't plan it well, I'll say
it's a very fundamental question, I would
There
rather
was,
write each of you to reflect on it.
In the SRS, there was, I mean, I think some of the, because so it started as a much more local developed, like the slum dweller cooperatives themselves were meant to actually build the house. And there were some NGOs and all that said they should not have private toilets inside, because then that'll protect them from gentrification. But I think it's a double-edged sword, right? Why should poor people not have the right to use it as an asset and sell? So I think and especially in a place like Bombay and all that, there's a market economy everywhere. So if they want to sell it, I don't think, so yeah, I'm not sure that gentrification is the biggest issues. In fact, it's quite hard to change.
Yeah.
Sure. First,
So, if it is a good house, reasonably provided, good facilities, everything, then the market price is very high compared to what you may have bought at or sold at.
Yes.
And at that market price, it's only the gentry, it's only the upper class which will buy it. So it may show up in black money. So one still thinks of it as low affordable income housing, but it is not. So it is you actually providing for the upper class. It is not for the lower class to begin with. It seems to be.
point well taken, sir. Ajesh?
Yes.
Just a minute. I used to do the prop index, the property index of Magic Bricks. One quarter, Uttam Nagar completely skewed my prop index. It swung in the direction of West Delhi and it swung in the direction of Uttam Nagar. And we wondered what the hell is happening there. We went on the ground and found that there were two metro lines which converged at Uttam Nagar, which passed through Uttam Nagar. It was a old colony. It was cheap. It was very poorly managed, but it was connecting to Nehru Place on one side and Connaught Place on the other. And it obviously it was affordable from that point of view, where you talk about the livelihood, right? So suddenly all the owners, to hell with whatever the planning norms are, they all started building 5 floors, and each floor was sold separately, and it came into formal housing. It came on Magic Bricks. So suddenly what happens is that, the city needs something. Whatever is manageable economically, the city will plan for that. Whether your planning norms go with that or not, doesn't matter. The city has to live somewhere. And that's really what.
why, when they were planning metro, why didn't they have a TOD policy in place? अब आप नहीं बनाओगे तो शहर अपने आप बना लेगा.
Gurgaon got developed by developers only.
Yeah.
That's why you have very poor trunk infrastructure.
Yeah.
Inside the layout, you have beautiful houses,
Fishes?
Yeah.
I think.
So, any further questions, observations, comments? Yeah.
I think बहुत लंबा चलेगा.
Sure, sir. Go ahead. One last point.
Very small point for Mr. Mishra. Sir, many central schemes, although the constitution provides for a state subject, that get influenced by your norms, subsidy norms. And this. Why can't we make sure the best practices, as in Gujarat, was mentioned many times, are built into the system, through indirectly through the subsidy route or through the bank finance route, so that people follow the best practices of a particular state elsewhere also.
No, I think you are right, and attempts are made to do that,
Capacity, not
but
practices.
uh,
And
there's
state
lot of,
capacity.
I mean, as I told you in the beginning, we took from the mission all the cities for training, all the states for training to Gujarat to learn about ISSR, to learn about how to structure a PPP project, what they are doing. But see, it as Mukta very rightly says, the culture of the place does not mean only culture of the people, the culture of the officers. I think the officers try to take that route which they are very comfortable. They don't want to come out of the comfort zone. See, but the government of India policies, schemes through subsidy and other things, we are certainly able to drive. Just taking out from this PPP, we could not do, we have done here also. But when we are doing some STP projects from Ganga mission thing, we brought PPP there, Viability, and we said that we will do this way only. Otherwise, people make STP, it is not operated, it is not maintained, and nothing happens. So I think we could bring some change. Lot of resistance from states, so it happens. But again, some states are doing better in that, some states keep on relapsing to the old ways. So it's very difficult to, I think we will have to have a lot of presence in our country. Things will move. We are actually moving, progressing, but you cannot expect every state to do everything in the same manner. Southern states, in fact, I used to joke that if Ganga would have passed through South India, I would have got all the DPRs met and we would have sanctioned all the projects in 2 years. But here getting DPR from UP and Bihar, I think I'm not nothing to be, I myself belong to that area. So nothing, but it was so difficult to even get a good DPR made. So I think, but we have to, but now they are doing quite well. It takes time. UP, we rightly said, UP has maximum housing shortage as per our demand. We were not getting any proposal for 1 year from there. And we were filling up with Andhra, Tamil Nadu, and we thought that all the South Indian states will take all the houses. And then this, but when UP woke up, UP is #1 now. When UP woke up, in one bunch, 1 lakh houses, 50,000 houses, huge bunches started coming from 2017, after 2016-17.
Yes, UP is the second state.
So UP became maximum number of
पॉलिटिकल सिचुएशन में से अब दिल्ली को स्लम रीडेवलपमेंट पॉलिसी सबसे ज्यादा जरूरत है। कहाँ आ रहा है?
पॉलिसी पे पॉलिसी बनी है।
कहाँ हो कहाँ रहा है? बॉम्बे ने कर लिया ना, दिल्ली क्यों नहीं कर पा रहा?
इसलिए आपका जो ISR में जहाँ भी स्लम के अच्छे इंस्टीट्यूशनल SRA है, तमिलनाडु also have a slum board, Karnataka, wherever there is already good institution, you will see better progress there.
Yeah,
Some
of
of the
course,
states
and
have no such institution.
in a 5-year period, that is what is possible,
Yes.
right? Why did AHP succeed in Maharashtra? Because the development authorities already are in the business of constructing houses.
Maharashtra had a
Same
very,
with Chennai.
Interesting scheme, I think something of interest. There was a proposal in Sholapur for 20,000 houses for BD
Yes,
workers.
yes, sir.
And
Yeah.
we changed the rule. We brought a new kind of guideline on PPP because the land was private. Normally, we are used to government gives land and cross subsidy model. Here, it is a very different model. Land belongs to society. Lot of fear, which actually, sir, what you said, in ministry also lot of fear that will it be a scandal if we give 1.5 lakhs rupees to 20,000 people and land does not belong to us. What is the guarantee? I think Anita was there in the ministry. We were working. Then we brought a kind of PPP policy, and in that 2 model we developed for the private land, and that opened up. But it happened sometime in 2017-18. So I think by that time, I mean that was not there. But 20,000 houses later, I think Prime Minister led foundation perhaps inaugurated those houses also. So I think it's a big colony came up on private land under AHP.
Thank you so much, sir, for your candid conversation.